Welcome to the CE module on results-driven wellness, serious efforts in health improvement. Our agenda for this module includes the following topics: an overview of the worksite wellness industry itself, why wellness is more difficult than it looks, introducing results-driven wellness, strategies for maximizing wellness program results, what will it take to move forward, and finally, a summary of key points. Let's look at a quick snapshot of the worksite wellness or corporate wellness field. And it's probably about 40 plus years of early innovators and early adopters in terms of Shoemaker's diffusion of innovation curves. So we have lots of people who have been out there doing this in various ways. We're now in early majority. So our ability to be in a place where the most employers are in fact doing wellness in some form probably characterizes our current situation. The early model for this field was the corporate headquarters fitness facility. And if you look back over those 4 decades of activity, you'll find that most of that originating activity came from the corporate headquarters model fitness facility. 30 to 80% of our programming presence depends on employer size. So a major portion of the extensiveness, comprehensiveness, ways in which various pathways and strategies and constructs are used depends a lot on the employer size. Somewhere around less than 7% of current efforts in worksite wellness are what I would consider comprehensive or more of a results-driven wellness program. So that leaves about 93% as not being results-driven wellness, which means that their effectiveness is generally in question. Most common interventions are the use of well-being assessments or health risk assessments, screening activity, physical activity programming, food service improvements, smoking policies, perhaps a website for the program or an e-health portal, wellness coaching, and health fairs. So those are what I would consider to be probably the most common interventions that we can have. Walking clubs would probably be added to that list as well. Without incentives, I think the average about 20% participation with plus or minus 10%. So in really bad situations, about 10% of employees use them, use wellness programs. In regular kind of normal situation, about 30% of employees will use a wellness program. There are more than 100 different economic return studies that I've read and about 96% of those show positive results. So we tend to have some evidence in the literature that this kind of activity can produce economic return. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of assurance that either the original studies have been extremely well designed or that we know exactly what the components of the wellness intervention are that produce economic return. And a major problem is the underfunding of most of that 93% of current employer or corporate wellness activities and their relative ineffectiveness. The industry size in general is estimated to be in the area of 3.5 to about 5.5 billion. So that's what we're currently spending on across some 8 million plus employers in the US. There's no standard definition of wellness also. So most of the time we start with some physical issues, oftentimes driven by clinical concerns and issues around risk and health risk. That's where a lot of our efforts in wellness have come from. We oftentimes include the mental sphere, so we deal with stress or depression or anxiety or sleep disorders. There's a variety of different issues that come up in wellness from these two areas. The areas we have not done much about, which we need to, is financial wellness, which is really helping people cope with one of the most stressful issues in the life of Americans, which is their personal finances, and the ability to use wellness to help them understand the nature and the structure and the benefits associated with their benefits as employees for a given organization. There's also issues that need to be addressed around emotional wellness, social wellness, cultural wellness, intellectual wellness, professional wellness in terms of an individual's career or professional nature. In addition, the spiritual dimensions, what drives our purpose and what gives us meaning as people, as human beings. And our worldview really looks at the issue of what are our major perceptions about why we're here, what we're to be doing, what the problems are, what the solutions are. That's our worldview aspects. So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you sit, there's no really standard definition of what a wellness program should embrace or should bring to a particular population or a particular employer. In addition, we have not really addressed the issue of our targeting of the issues and behavior change that our programs really should be doing in terms of producing specific types of results. So we have essentially avoided the issue of what to target our programs on, and as a result, we oftentimes don't achieve much of the results that these programs are potentially possible or capable of doing. In addition, wellness is really about behavior change, but changing long-term behavior is very difficult, and we don't oftentimes recognize that difficulty. In addition, most people don't do what they know they should for their own health. So part of the problem we are faced with is how do we actually use wellness programs to get people to begin to do the things that perhaps they know they should be doing. The reality is that only about 20% of employees are generally intrinsically motivated for wellness. That leaves 80% being not intrinsically motivated. So unless we have done some fairly powerful incentives with our wellness program, we tend to get a very small proportion of employees actively participating in a wellness program. So that's part of the realism or the reality of what we're faced with when we think about wellness programming. Our next issue is, where do you want to be in terms of worksite wellness? And if we do what's called a 2x2 analysis, and we take the issue of effectiveness versus ineffectiveness, or adequacy of funding versus underfunding, the issues in wellness tend to be which of those boxes are you in fact in. And the vast majority of employer wellness activities, somewhere in the area of 90%, are in the underfunded box and the relatively ineffective. So that puts them in A. Another small percentage are underfunded but reasonably effective because of design and implementation capability, and that would be in B. There's a few more in C, adequately funded but relatively ineffective because their design and their execution of the design is not really up to speed. And then we have maybe that 7% or so that are adequately funded and reasonably effective, and that's where D is. But it is very difficult to get to D. Most of our senior managers don't have the appetite to be able to either spend at an adequate level or support the kind of programming that will produce effects or results at a high level. Now, what else makes wellness so difficult for us to do? First of all, we have more than 150 million people in the labor force in the US. These are unique people. They each have an individual and unique wellness set of challenges. So our programs have to be able to address the variety and the diversity of need that exists around an individual's choices around their own wellness. We also have at least 20 different possible wellness targets that these programs can take on. There are really a lot more targets than that we would call prevention targets that have a behavioral component to them. But in general, we don't have any real sophisticated approach toward identifying what those targets are and then matching them against the results that management wants from a wellness program. Another one of the characteristics is we have the trans-theoretical model, which tells us about stages of readiness to change for each of those 20 plus targets. And those are in constant flux. So people are changing their situation around their state of readiness for those 20 different targets. So that gives our programming a real challenge in terms of the variability of approach that's necessary in order to meet the individual's unique needs, but also to link to something that is behaviorally related to a result which is desired by management, and in fact also adjust to the constantly changing personal situation of each of those employees. We also have 5 different economic variables that we can look at in wellness, and that includes health plan cost, which is the most prominent economic variable that wellness programs have attempted to address, sick leave absenteeism, the workers' compensation costs from work-related injuries and illness, disability insurance costs, which include both short-term disability and long-term disability, and those are due to reasons which are not work-related, but the individual is not able to work for some reason, usually a health-related reason. And then the last of the 5 economic variables is the variable of presenteeism. And presenteeism in the American sense is the way in which our productivity is impaired or reduced by staying at work when we have an underlying health problem. So we can have migraine headaches, or we can have a reflux condition, or an upper respiratory infection, or allergies, or musculoskeletal pain. And if we don't have some ways of abating some of the severity of those symptoms and the effect that they oftentimes have on our productivity, then we lose part of the value of the compensation for that individual employee. So that presenteeism is one of those economic variables. So what makes wellness very difficult for us is those first 3 points, but also the fact that our economic rationale for doing wellness is oftentimes not very clear and does not necessarily address more than just one of the economic variables that employers may in fact be concerned about. In addition, we also are in a sea of spending around marketing that has to do with unhealthy foods, labor-saving products that reduce our physical activity in life, and stimulants and other kinds of things that affect us. So we've got all of this sea of marketing messages around us that are actually working in the opposite direction of what we oftentimes are doing in our various wellness efforts at trying to reduce underlying health risk issues and or behavior issues which contribute or shape human health. And we also have significant competition for employee attention, for the mind share that employees have to allocate to wellness in order to actually take part in programs. So we have a lot of that competition going on, and that's oftentimes why we're using incentives to be able to attract people or to compel people to take some steps with their own wellness. So these are some of the reasons why I believe, and we believe at the Chapman Institute, that wellness is a lot more difficult than we have perhaps been influenced or kind of sold the bill of goods. It's not a simplistic problem, and it's not going to be a simplistic solution. Now, here's why wellness is not going to go away. I believe that we will, for the long term, be dealing with these issues. We'll deal with them differently, and I'll be answering a question at the end of this module that has to do with what I see as the future of worksite wellness. But this data comes from the work of the World Economic Foundation and World Economic Forum. And it basically says that these 8 risk factors, and that includes poor diet, physical inactivity, smoking, lack of health screening, poor stress management, poor standards of care, in terms of issues that we as consumers should know about: insufficient sleep, excessive alcohol consumption. That those 8 risks and behaviors drive 15 chronic conditions, and those conditions go from diabetes at the top all the way down to number 15, hypercholesterolemia or high cholesterol. And they account for 80% of the total costs of all chronic illnesses worldwide. Now, from an international perspective, developed nations tend to have much higher chronic illness cost because their acute problems of infection and other types of issues are usually much less. So our developed nations of the world, in the US for instance, Dorothy Rice and her colleagues at the National Center for Health Statistics found that about 70% of all healthcare expenditures in the US, and that's about $3.4 trillion at the current rate of expenditure, 80 or 70% of those are due to chronic illness. And 80% of that 70% are driven by these 8 risk factors. So from this perspective, I would probably say to you that I don't think wellness is going to be a fad. I don't think people are going to drop it after a period of time. We may call it something different. We may approach it in different ways. We may use different technology around it. But the basic issue is we've got too much at stake in an economic vantage point, from an economic vantage point, to be able to leave this behind. Now, we have something called a results hierarchy, and it basically says if you are going to produce results from a wellness program, and this is about results-driven wellness, we generally have to have that hierarchy show various effects. The first level is information change. So in people that are part employees and family members of employees that are in a particular employer, they in fact usually go through some information change. We oftentimes do that with our wellness programs, and we call that awareness. Now, in addition, attitudes are oftentimes affected. So if I see my employer saying to me, gosh, it's really important for you to take better care of your health, I may use that as an excuse to change my attitude around my own wellness. In addition, my readiness to change needs to change. And those 5 stages of readiness to change include pre-contemplation. I'm not thinking about a change. Contemplation, I'm thinking about it, but I haven't chosen to make any definitive action. The 3rd stage is what we call preparation, and that's where I've decided within 30 days I'm going to begin a new behavior. And then the 4th stage is I'm in an action stage. And that stage is I've been doing this activity, but I'm not very consistent. I haven't been doing it long enough for it to become a deeply embedded habit. And then the 5th stage is what we call maintenance. And that's where we are in a situation where our habit pattern is very strong and we're pretty consistent around our performance of that specific behavior. Now, one of the things about this results hierarchy is it touches on the role that wellness programs and results-driven wellness programs particularly have to do with habit formation. We have lots of bad habits health-wise, and we in fact are using wellness interventions to help people drop the bad habit health-wise and adopt a new habit. And when we talk about a habit, we're essentially talking about cues that cue our use of that in performance of that behavior. And then we're talking about a routine, and that routine can be either unhealthy or healthy. And we then are talking about the rewards that we get from that change. So when we talk about the results hierarchy, we're generally talking about wellness programs changing the information in our populations, changing attitudes that underlie that information, and then the attitudes which also underlie our readiness to change. And when we do readiness to change in that trans-theoretical model, it's very helpful for us because we know what kinds of information people need and how to approach this next stage of readiness to change. Now, once that readiness to change changes, we oftentimes end up with behavior change. And so behavior change, again, is what the core of wellness is about. It's not just about knowing what you need to do, it's about doing what you need to do. And that behavior change tends to affect through the epidemiology of health risk that we have amassed over the last 4 decades. That has to do with health risk prevalence. How many people are overweight? How many people don't exercise? How many people smoke 1 pack a day or more? How many people have high cholesterol? How many people have elevated blood pressure? How many people have elevated blood sugar? How many people practice distracted driving? How many people don't wear seat belts? So we've got about 300 different behaviors that affect population health. And what we're doing in the wellness sphere is we're focusing on specific ones of those. Those are the 20 plus targets that we could potentially focus on. And then we're working on reducing the risk prevalence, because we know that there is also an economic risk premium attached to those specific risk factors. So a lot of the work of Dee Eddington and David Anderson and other leaders in the field of wellness have essentially documented these relationships. And once we see health risk prevalence changes, we often see improvements in health status. So we measure that by doing preventive screening. We do various kinds of testing that allows us to look at the health status of the individual. Once that health status improvement takes place, we oftentimes are seeing a lower prevalence of chronic diseases, and we in fact are seeing differences in how people utilize healthcare resources. So the days of hospitalization, the numbers of physician visits, the amount of prescription drugs, the performance of preventive medical activities. Those are all part of that healthcare utilization. And once we then see some healthcare utilization and or changes in my productivity at work, I then can amass that economic return by looking at the effects of my wellness program on health plan costs, sick leave absenteeism, workers' compensation, disability insurance, and presenteeism cost. So this results hierarchy basically says to us, you need to have a way of making changes at each of these levels and setting the stage for your ability to have the result that's in the hierarchy above you changed. So we can't go from information change all the way up to economic return. That does not work well. So we've got to be able to have this hierarchy of results with a strong emphasis on behavior change. So that comes along with our results orientation to results-driven wellness. Now, there are different ways of doing wellness, and we're going to look at 3 different major ways. The first way is the feel-good wellness model, and it includes the following features. So it's fun activity, there's very little reduction of health risk, there's very little focus on those people with multiple health risk. It's not very health cost management oriented, pretty much all volunteer programming, site-based only, so I only get this if I'm at work. No personalization, minimal incentives, no spouses served, very little evaluation. So that's what we call the feel-good approach to wellness. And that's what a lot of our activity in wellness is in the American worksite. So we in fact are doing a morale-oriented kind of program. Most of our effect is going to be an improved morale. People will feel good or better. They won't necessarily feel or be changed in terms of their health status. Once we do this feel-good model, we oftentimes want to become more adept at being able to do more with our programs, so we frequently go to what's called the traditional wellness approach. And that traditional approach includes things that parallel what the feel-good model is. We're still mostly health-focused. We have some risk reduction, a little bit of high-risk focus, helping those people with multiple health risk, limited health cost management, all voluntary still, site-based only, fairly weak personalizations. We're not using a lot of computer technology to personalize our programming. Modest incentives, few spouses served, weak evaluation. And this is a model that we generally look at as activity oriented. We're doing a lot of things and we're getting people busy doing things. Doesn't necessarily mean they're changing their long-term behavior, but their short-term behavior is showing some changes. So that traditional approach is really more of a smorgasbord. I'm putting out various kinds of activities. You engage as the employee in some of those, and I'm hoping that somehow health improvements and all the other results in the hierarchy are going to come about. Unfortunately, not a lot of those higher order effects take place with the traditional model. Then I oftentimes am then faced with, what do I do now? I've been doing this program. We've got a lot of people doing different kinds of things in wellness, but I don't see anything happening to my health plan cost or my sick leave or workers' comp or disability or presenteeism. And then that's usually when you want to ask the question, perhaps we need to go to more of a results-driven model of wellness. And that model adds a strong emphasis on productivity. It begins to get much more serious about helping people reduce selected health risks. We then also get much stronger focus on helping the people who have multiple health risks. So we provide coaching to them. We give them incentives around change in several areas. We also have a much stronger health cost management focus. So we're doing things like medical self-care, consumer health education, injury prevention, and other kinds of strategies to help improve the cost and the health of individuals. There's some required activity. So we begin to say to people, we really want everybody to fill out a well-being assessment. We want everybody to have at least one coaching call. So we start thinking about what are those minimums that we want in the program. We also tend to have more of a site and virtual approach to wellness. So I can get wellness when I'm at home. My spouse can get access to the wellness program. So I start to structure activities so that it doesn't matter where you are, you can get a lot of help with your wellness. It also becomes more strongly personal and becomes personalized because I'm beginning to use the information that I collect in these surveys, like the health risk assessment or a well-being assessment, to actually help formulate and influence the design of our wellness program. We're also getting into major incentives. So I'm somewhere around $600 to $1,200 of value, usually in the form of a lower cost for my health plan coverage. And I'm using that to get 85, 90, 95% of employees actively engaged in doing wellness. Also, we begin to pick up more ability to serve spouses. So the spousal approach to wellness supports the family's approach to wellness. So I begin to start thinking more about how do I move the wellness stuff into the entire population. And I'm doing much more rigorous evaluation. So I have the ability to do a lot more in the way of metrics, to manage things, to look at things, to be able to focus on things in terms of improvement. And that kind of wellness, this is what we're introducing in this particular module, is results-driven wellness. That results orientation comes out strongly in terms of producing much more effect across all of the hierarchy of results that we just looked at. So this particular model of wellness is a more serious model of wellness. I have to fund it at a higher level. I have to do more to get the organization and the culture oriented around wellness. But this is the type of wellness that is going to produce much more in terms of that results hierarchy that we just covered. So we are introducing in this module this results-driven wellness as being the type of wellness that organizations that really do want to improve the health of their employees, want to improve their productivity, want to lower their cost, their health-related costs, that's the type of wellness that the organization needs to be able to do. Now, that results-driven wellness framework is what we use to evaluate our efforts and to plan our efforts around results-driven wellness. And the model that we use within the WellCert program, the 4 levels of certification, includes metrics which define our needs and targets. You can see the different kinds of metrics. Each of these is a constellation of several metrics. There's a 6-step planning process which you learn in level 1 and then proceed to use in levels 2, 3, and 4. And that includes the steps of setting your wellness strategy, and that's the choice of, am I going after the feel-good model, the traditional model, which is more the smorgasbord model, or the results-driven model. Then I'm establishing the infrastructure, 2 different kinds, technology and organizational infrastructure. That's what I hang the program on. That's what allows me to deliver it to everybody. Step 3 is planning communication. Step 4, I'm looking for how I'm going to take measurement opportunities, tracking opportunities, active involvement opportunities for the individual throughout my program. Then step 5, I'm going to be planning group activities where I get some of the energy, some of the shaping of cultural norms, the support, accountability, structuring of behavior change around those group activities. Step 6 is, now that I know my steps 1 through 5 and I have a program defined, what are the policies I need to put in place and what are the physical evidence kinds of issues I need to change around the work site to reinforce everything that's happening inside that wellness program. So that's the 6-step planning process. I end up coming out of that process choosing and knowing I'm going to do feel-good wellness and here's what the expectations are for that, or I'm going to do traditional wellness and here's what that looks like, or the results-driven wellness, here are the interventions which I need to be able to do in order to do that kind of wellness. Then the intermediate results, we oftentimes are looking at, is behavior changing in the population? Are they healthier by objective measure? Is there some subjective assessment of how productive they are? And then the ultimate results break down into the return on investment, which are those 5 economic variables, and or other benefits, which we call value on investment. So these are the different kinds of things that a wellness program can contribute to that are not as easy for us to put into an economic analysis. And then the feedback loop is basically my looking at my ultimate results, adjusting next year's targets and needs, and then going through an abbreviated planning process, coming up with interventions, implementing those, measuring some of the intermediate results, and then being able to look at my ultimate results for that year. So this framework is a very useful, logical framework for how we go about the process of actually doing wellness and then measuring its effect and then using what we come up with as findings to help shape the program for the next program cycle. Now, we're going to look at a series of programming strategies for maximizing the results-driven wellness model. So these are all different ways of improving the effectiveness of that results-driven wellness. You can use well-designed incentives, and we have modules that cover that topic. We also have a module on getting the most out of telephonic coaching, including spouses can enhance the program's effectiveness and results. We can broaden our economic variables. So instead of looking at just health plan cost, we might add in sick leave absenteeism or workers' comp or presenteeism, and we then measure that and then analyze the results of that over time. Since all of these wellness interventions will affect all 5 variables, if we only look at one variable and we ignore the other 4, we're really doing a disservice to our ability to look at the economic realities of our program. We may want to include injury prevention strategies. So the four domains of injury prevention for working populations are worksite-based injury prevention, which is a lot of the things that NIOSH and OSHA tend to help us do in the worksite. We also have home safety injury prevention. That's where we're injured at home, and we do some things to reduce the risk of that. We also have vehicular injury prevention. So that's defensive driving, it's knowing when to go out in terms of severe weather. It's all of those things that have to do with vehicular and vehicular choices. And then we have recreational choices and recreational risk taking. So we can then do some injury prevention around those areas. So when you see the 4 there, that just means that there are 4 domains of injury prevention. You would want to do all 4 because all 4 of those affect all 5 of the variables, the economic variables. We also would want to do lots of demos and have those demos actually shape our ability to have people know how to use a eHealth portal or what the value of a coaching call is. So I can do lots of demos to help people see that. It becomes even more important the older the average age of the individual in my workforce is. So I want to do lots of demos. I want to package my LMS modules. So learning management system modules are these kinds of modules. Just what you're doing right now is a LMS module. So that learning management system helps us capture the data and the information and the skills we want to transfer to people, and then it monitors who has completed those. They usually have a test attached to each module, just as you have a test attached to this module. So that's how we package that information. You can have an annual briefing for employees. So that's where you actually bring the wellness issues up and put them formally in front of your employees every year. You might do that by the way around open enrollment so that they understand what the wellness program is doing and it's how it attaches and shapes their premium contribution for their health plan, all of those things. We also then have including medical self-care. So we can include issues which have to do with how do I interpret the symptoms that I or my family members have. And on the average American over the age of 18, according to the National Health Survey conducted by the National Centers for Health Statistics, has 2 medical symptom events per month on average. So that means that every month I'm doing medical self-care. And I'm doing it several times. And some of the time I choose to go into the doctor. Some of the time I just ignore it and go to work. Some of the time I may stay home. So we're doing that medical self-care. It's just that we do that without having any help from someone who's more knowledgeable about health, like a physician. So medical self-care has to do with taking physician-derived information and science and actually helping us make decisions about what kind of health care we use to affect a specific set of symptoms. You can also include consumer health education. So it's all the issues of how do I pick a good doctor and how do I prepare for a visit and why should I get the preventive screening done. And it's a whole series of consumer health education issues. We have some extensive modules on those. That's also covered in our level 3 of the WellCert program. You can require an annual well-being assessment or health risk assessment, and then you can use the information. Most employers don't use the HRA information to help structure the program, and that's an unfortunate reality. So that keeps our programs from being very effective because we're asking people information and then not using the answers they give us. Also, you can use risk stratification, and we'll see what that looks like. But the idea that you have a process like a well-being assessment, and then you have an assignment of people to a risk strata, and then we have and shape incentives and communication to actually help them address whatever the risk is that they're facing. There's also using multiple interventions, so we can look for ways of being able to provide options for people, and we can structure those offers that oftentimes come out of the process in a way that appeals to their learning preferences or what kinds of issues they want to learn. We can also spread the program out, so instead of getting all the programming in a short period of time, we basically spread it out over the year. We also can have strong organizational support for wellness. We can do some things with our policies and with our physical space that show that the organization has a strong value for people involving themselves in wellness activities. And we also can do strong integration. There's another module on that, but the idea is that there's 3 levels of integration. Level 1 is how well does your wellness program connect with the various interventions? How do they connect in terms of reminders and use of information and all those areas? Then level 2 is how well does the wellness program connect with other organizational functions that have to do with health, like the EAP, or like the return to work program, or disability management, or our sick leave absenteeism. So that's an integration of wellness into those other areas. And then level 3 integration is how well does our wellness program connect with external wellness resources, like the local hospital or the fitness center or Planet Fitness down the street or Gold's Gym, or national programs that provide call-in, phone support for smoking cessation. There's a whole bunch of integration at level 3. So we can better integrate our program to get and maximize many of the results that are associated with this results-driven approach to wellness. And all of these strategies, we tend to want to use them at different points along the way. So these are the things we would oftentimes consider as improvements that we would implement year over year. We also want to strongly use the AMSO concept. And the AMSO concept, developed by Michael O'Donnell, essentially says for a wellness program to be effective, it has to have a way of ongoing way of bringing awareness of health and wellness issues to each employee. So that needs to be an ongoing method for doing that. The M in AMSO stands for the ability to augment that intrinsic 20% motivation and actually reach a higher percentage of employees in the workforce with extrinsic reasons for motivation. So that's why we use incentives or group competition or gaming opportunities. There are a bunch of things we do around the M in AMSO. The S in AMSO relates to a wellness program that has a way of helping people develop the new skills associated with the healthier behavior. When I'm changing my habit out and I'm changing that unhealthy routine for a healthy routine, then I need to have the skills to be able to do that. And then the O in AMSO means I have to have an opportunity to practice those new skills so that they can become part of my habit. So I need to reform my habit and have the healthy habit actually displace the unhealthy habit. So these are the main strategies for maximizing the results-driven wellness program model and strategy for an employer or corporate wellness program. Now, to move forward with this results-driven wellness model, it's going to take some effort. And that effort includes a long-term perspective on health and wellness. It includes the ability for our wellness programs to survive the ups and downs of the business cycle. So when things are tight, we don't want the wellness program to get axed. So we've got to be able to figure out how to survive. We also need to have skills to move your organization forward. Many organizations that I run into now and today are in fact stuck. They're stuck with at a particular level of wellness activity. They don't seem to be able to either go backwards or forwards. So you have to have the skills to know how to get your organization unstuck. And that's what we do in the levels 1 through 4. You also need to have about $100 a month health plan premium contribution waiver for engagement in wellness. If you're able to get $100 a month added to the employee's health plan premium contribution amount, and then you waive a portion of that or all of that, you in fact will get 85–90% of your employees actively engaged in wellness. We don't want to leave them there with just the extrinsic motivation though. We want to also be doing some things in our program to help convert that extrinsic source of motivation to an intrinsic source of motivation. and that we cover in another module. Programming strategies to translate extrinsic into intrinsic motivation. So we need to be doing some things with our programs, and there are 7 things we recommend for people to do to move their population from an extrinsic source of motivation around wellness to an intrinsic source. The economic base that includes health plan cost, sick leave absenteeism cost, workers' compensation cost, disability insurance costs, and presenteeism cost. So build a strong economic base. This makes wellness more of a strategic business enterprise rather than a tactical business enterprise. Use of credible metrics for tracking so that you can in fact track across program operations, productivity, and cost worker health. So the use of credible metrics, enterprise-wide, well-integrated programming. So it needs to be workforce-wide, organization-wide in terms of its approach. And there needs to be a strategic view of wellness as a business imperative. So I need to see wellness as contributing to the strategic future of my business. If I'm simply doing wellness as a tactical activity to get my health plan costs down, and I haven't done any of these other things, and I'm just stuck at doing small amounts of activity in wellness, that's not going to move me toward a results-driven model. So I have to have that strategic view of wellness as a business imperative for my organization. So in summary, these are the ways in which we have to move forward if we want to move toward this results-driven wellness model. Now, a summary of key points for this particular module. Most wellness programs are not results-driven. So the vast majority of activities, I would say again, about 7% or so are in this results-driven area. They get good results on their wellness program, but the vast majority of others are not results-driven. Feel-good wellness is not likely to last. I think it's a nice experience for people. It helps elevate morale. It shows some concern for the employer, for the employees, but it's not going to last the long term. Wellness is a lot more difficult than it looks. So it's not just giving people a pamphlet and telling them to go for a walk at lunch. It's a lot more complicated than that. Wellness is about long-term behavior change. Behavior change is required to produce results. Results are key to wellness program survival. And results-driven wellness is required for a strategic organizational approach to wellness. And the future will be bright for wellness efforts if we can meet this challenge. And it is a significant challenge. We've got a lot of people who are stuck. They're using simplistic methods in their approach to wellness. It's not producing the results that management wants, and those programs are not likely to be around over the long haul. So these are the summary of key points from this particular CE module. Now let's address some key questions. Our first question is, why is results-driven wellness important? And I believe that it's important because it's required for the results that management wants from its wellness efforts. And I believe that it's also important because it represents as a model a dose of realism for employers so that they are not thinking that they can do virtually anything under the name of wellness and somehow get all kinds of results. I think that the results-driven wellness model itself or strategy also secures a potential long-term role for wellness in the American workplace. I believe if we are not serious about the wellness activities we engage in, then I don't believe that wellness is going to continue to be around in the current form that it is. It will morph or it will change, and we will not get the health improvement or the other results, part of the results hierarchy that we talked about earlier. The second question is, what major trends are currently shaping the worksite wellness industry? And I think the trends that I see are, one, a move to well-being, and in that process simplifying their approach to wellness to the point where it's not going to work very well. So I think that we're looking to use well-being as a way of getting out of the harder efforts and work that's required to actually improve population health. I think the second trend that I think is out there is it's likely to produce mediocre results. So I think that as more people get stuck in their particular approach to wellness and they end up finding mediocre results, that will end up being a major trend that shapes and affects the field. The third trend is that I think they're now grabbing for every easy solution they can find. So all of a sudden we have people coming into the corporate wellness field that think that a wellness program is wearing a Fitbit and having it be connected to an incentive program that's on your eHealth portal. That's all they think of. So they're grabbing for the easy solution, the simple solution, but unfortunately the ineffective solution. The fourth strategy, or the fourth trend that I see, is many are giving up. They're basically saying this is too much work, it's too hard, we've got too many other important things we need to do, we can't handle this. And I think that that will be a major trend which occurs over the future, is that we will actually having people drop what they're doing or use what they're doing and just keeping it in place, but having virtually no results associated with it. And I think the fifth trend that's out there is a great deal of uncertainty over the election and how that's going to shape the future of healthcare reform in this country, and over how that reform will end up increasing the cost of healthcare coverage for employers. So I think that that major trend of uncertainty will have an effect on our field. Whether it's a good effect or a bad effect will depend in a large measure to whether people are doing results-driven wellness or whether they're staying with a stuck feel-good or a stuck traditional approach to wellness. The third question is, what do you think the future of worksite wellness will look like? And I think, first of all, we are going to see kind of the separation of employers who are doing real wellness versus those that are doing the perfunctory old wellness. And I think that there will be few who will do what's necessary to accomplish a results-driven approach to wellness. I think the shakeout will have people getting stuck in either the feel-good model or the results-driven model. So I think that that shakeout will cause people to either decide we're going to do this right or we're not going to do it. Another one of the future issues is more lip service on the importance of the issues of wellness. So I think we are going to talk about it more. I don't think we're necessarily going to do it more. And I think another one of the trends or the future aspects of the field itself will be a rush toward finding simplistic solutions that will eventually lose popularity because they will not produce the results that people are expecting. So I think we will be chasing after the shiny object and getting confused by that. I think another one of the issues that defines the future of the field is the consistent look for ease of administration. So can I get my health plan to do this for me? Can I get somebody else to do this for me? Is there a way that I can put this all on the employee? So I think there was going to be a whole major trend of looking for ease in administration for employers. And then I think the last part of the future of worksite wellness, which I support and I think is actually a very good thing, is the ability for us to look at online marketing and e-commerce techniques that are now being used by organizations like Amazon, and using those and applying them to wellness. We have an effort underway at the Chapman Institute called WellDrive. And WellDrive is a drip well-being assessment that structures offers for people using a lot of what has been found to work in the online marketing and e-commerce area. So that kind of activity is what we believe with the future of worksite wellness will need to embrace. And that is being able to break wellness down into smaller bite-sized chunks, keep it simple for the employer, where the employer only pays for the specific wellness activities that the employee engages in. And we basically keep this on a very consistent smartphone, based platform that allows us to take wellness and actually um, put it out into people's environments wherever they are. So those are some of the things that we see as part of the future of corporate wellness or future of worksite wellness. Now that you've completed this particular module, CE module, go ahead and take the quiz.